first, my name is Brian Vicente. That's BRINVICENTE. I'm one of the primary architects of Amendment 64, the legalization measure that passed last November by a 10-point margin in Colorado. I am here in my role as head of the Committee for Responsible Regulation. It's the group that has come together to support the proposition. So, last November, Colorado took a bold step forward, becoming the first state to regulate possession and sale of marijuana for adults 21 and older. As part of that amendment that passed, Colorado voters demanded a strict regulatory structure be put in place and be fully funded in order to make sure that this is there's excellent oversight of this new industry. So the taxes that I'm going to talk about go really to two different places. One is to fund that robust regulatory structure for this industry. Two is to public school construction. I'm going to let some of our other speakers talk about that specifically. Looking at a total, what is estimated to be about $70 million in new tax revenue coming into our state coffers from these taxes, which again are on the ballot this November. So the taxes break out in the following way. There is a 15% excise tax, which we placed from the wholesale to the retail. That is specifically earmarked for public school construction every single year. The second piece of the tax, which we voted on again in one fell swoop this November, is a 10% tax on retail sale of marijuana. That will go to the regulatory structure and creating the robust oversight of this industry. So I'll let our speakers kind of talk about why they're supporting this. A couple things that I just wanted to mention at the front end. We really think that we need to keep the promise to Colorado voters passing this by establishing a regulatory structure, making Colorado a model for how to appropriately and responsibly regulate this product. It's worth noting that this is a tax really that will only apply to people that choose to participate in the regulated marijuana world. So for those who do not purchase marijuana, they will not be subject to this tax, right? So it's not imposed upon people that choose not to use marijuana. The final thing I wanted to point out is that Proposition AA demands a fully funded regulatory structure, and it sets that up. And I think that's especially important in light of the Department of Justice memo, which came out last week, which said that the federal government will in fact allow Colorado voters the bill to be effectuated if we are fully funding the regulatory structure, if we establish strict oversights. So there are a number of speakers, and I guess before I jump into those, I did want to say, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning, we've really just launched this campaign, but we've already received a number of prestigious endorsements. That includes the Attorney General of the state, Attorney General John Suthers, the Colorado Municipal League, the Denver Chamber of Commerce, Colorado Concern, and also the Colorado Association of Police Chiefs. So obviously we are creating a diverse group of stakeholders that are interested in backing these. Those groups have already endorsed. We expect more endorsements to come forward soon. So our speakers today are a number of state representatives, a number of industry stakeholders. I'm going to turn things over first to State Representative Dan McGovern.
Thank you, Brian, and I want to thank Brian and many others behind me and in front of me, honestly, who've gotten together to help spearhead this campaign, both with fundraising and strategic development on messaging, the entire 9 yards that it takes to make sure a campaign of this magnitude passes. This has been a regulatory marathon. We started back in November of last year, after the passage of Amendment 64, working with a task force convened by the Governor of Colorado, members from law enforcement, from criminal defense, from child advocacy, legislators, senators, representatives, and everyone in between, the best experts in the country to come up with recommendations on how to regulate marijuana recreationally. And what we found during that task force is there was North Star that we looked at, which was public safety and protecting our children and our families from unnecessary exposure to this drug. We then took those recommendations from the task force and we took another leg of the marathon and we went to the legislature. And in the legislature we discussed and debated. I had the honor of co-chairing the Joint Select Committee Task Force for spent hours and hours figuring out how we could best protect the public safety, how we could best protect our children, and how we could best regulate this industry. And now on the final leg of this marathon, the last 6 miles I would call it, is the funding of the regulations. The funding to make sure that law enforcement has the tools it needs to crack down on the black market. The funding necessary to make sure that those who suffer from substance abuse have the ability to be treated. The funding necessary for those regulators in both the state and the city to inspect and make sure that the industry is held to the highest standards and that those black market forces that may try to divert any product to those under 21, those who shouldn't be entitled or should have any access to this, are stopped. And that's why this campaign is the last leg of this marathon, because without these taxes, without this additional funding, we will have to do one of two things. We'll either have to take money from education and other much needed programs in Colorado to fund the regulation of this industry, or we'll have lackluster or lax enforcement. And so this campaign, this kickoff, is to acknowledge and recognize to the people of Colorado these taxes absolutely must pass. And again, I want to give credit where credit is due. In June or July of this year, we pulled together select members of the industry, members of very diverse stakeholder groups, and put them at a table and said, we need to figure out how we're going to run this campaign, how we're going to fund this campaign, and they stood up to the plate. There's a lot of folks I do want to acknowledge who did that. Colin Kennedy, Josh Hamfley, Marty Sewell, Mark Belkin, Ed Tower. There are numerous others behind me who were also involved with that effort, not notably Christian Cederberg and Brian Vicente, as long as Mary Kay Hogan and many others. And so I want to make sure that they get the credit. And for those of you behind me who didn't hear your name, make sure you shout it out to the crowd here, and we'll make sure we acknowledge everyone who's been participating in this. So I want to thank you here for being here today, but it is a pleasure to start this last leg of the marathon with you. Let's make sure we pass these taxes and make sure we protect the public safety in Colorado.
Good afternoon, my name is Christy Kelly, and I am a business owner of Goodness. As a business owner in the state of Colorado, we think it's really important that the voters support Proposition AA. It's got a lot of benefit in terms of being able to help with the regulation on the back end of the cannabis industry, and thank you for your support.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Capitol. Thanks for being here. My name is Pat Stedman. I serve as a state senator representing District 31 in Central and Southeast Denver, and I currently serve as the chairman of the Joint Budget Committee. And I'm voting yes on Prop AA, and I'm going to be campaigning for it, encouraging my constituents and people all across Colorado to join me in supporting this reasonable and responsible tax question that voters set in motion last November when they amended our state constitution to provide for marijuana legalization. The constitutional amendment, which we knew at the time as Amendment 64, specifically provided that there would be authority for an excise tax to be imposed upon the cultivation of marijuana, that the proceeds of that would benefit public school construction and capital needs in our school districts across Colorado. And per the voters' instruction last November with that constitutional amendment, your legislature has referred to the ballot Prop AA to do just that, to impose a 15% excise tax as contemplated by the Constitution, with all of those proceeds, or at least up until the first $40 million, benefiting the Public School Construction Fund and the BEST program, which has built and renovated and invested in school buildings all across our state. It's been wildly successful. However, the needs are great, and the current revenues to the BEST program are insufficient to meet the future demands of school construction and Colorado school children. And so taxing retail marijuana with Prop AA is one of the ways we're going to make sure that the BEST program continues to provide school infrastructure, school resources for children into the future. I think what you see in the legislation that passed this last session to implement Amendment 64 is fully in keeping with the intent of voters when they approved this measure last November. The same concerns that were recently expressed by the Department of Justice in the memo that just came out about the federal approach to our marijuana legalization, the same concerns about diversion, about sales to minors, about involvement of organized crime. Those concerns were all in the backs of the minds of your state legislature this past spring when we were debating and passing the laws that have now been put in place to implement Amendment 64. Voting yes on AA is the last piece of completing that. I'm sure the legislature will continue to make adjustments into the future as this new era of legal recreational marijuana in Colorado unfolds. But I think we've taken very responsible, very necessary first steps, and that's why I'm proud to endorse this measure, and we'll be campaigning for it and asking you to vote for it as well. Thanks.
My name is State Representative Jonathan Singer. I represent the folks in Longmont, Lyons, Allens Park, and Niwot. It's a diverse community that starts in the suburbs but goes all the way up to the doorstep of Rocky Mountain National Park. But even though it's a diverse community, they all were very clear that we should support Amendment 64. And what Proposition AA is about fulfilling the promise of Amendment 64. The drafters of Amendment 64 understood that it was important for our community to not only have better schools, but stronger and safer communities. And that is what Proposition AA does. Never before have we really seen law enforcement come together with members of the marijuana business community to support a tax initiative on this new burgeoning industry. As someone who is a social worker, working with kids who are at risk of drug and alcohol abuse, and even working as a drug and alcohol counselor at Colorado State University, I understand the effects of drugs, and I also understand the importance of making sure that we have the funding available to make sure that our communities are safe and we build better schools. That's what this money will do. As you heard Assistant Majority Leader Representative Dan Pamone talk about, this is not only making sure that we protect our communities, but making sure that marijuana pays its own way. That we're not taking drugs, putting drugs into our community in a way that's irresponsible. And last but certainly not least, this is what will help keep drugs out of the hands of kids, drugs out of the hands of criminals and cartels. We're going to keep our communities safe. We're going to do it by making sure that marijuana pays its own way. That's why I'm out here supporting Proposition AA, and I hope you do the same. Thank you.
Mark Melkin, I'm Organizing Director for the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, Local 7, the largest union in the state of Colorado. We support Proposition AA because we believe in a mature and responsible industry that is respectful of the needs of its employees and respectful of the needs of the public. Imagine if there was news that thousands and thousands of new jobs would be created in Colorado. Well, that's the reality with the implementation of Amendment 64. Thousands of new jobs will be created that will be a great stimulus for Colorado's economy. But we can't afford low-wage, poverty-wage jobs. As a representative of Local 7, we support jobs that pay employees a livable wage, responsive to the public, responsible to the children in our community, and will help sustain and build a partnership with this industry in the future.
Good afternoon. My name is Norton Arbelas, the founder of the Medical Marijuana Industry Group, a trade association here in Colorado, compliance officer for the River Rock Medical Marijuana Center. This Proposition AA is good for business and it's good for Colorado. At its heart, it's about two things. It's about regulation and education. The fact is, in terms of regulation, the state regulators need this money to make sure that we fulfill the mandate that was spelled out in Attorney General's memo just this week. In terms of education, nothing could be more clear than to fulfill the promise of Amendment 64, to build new schools in the state of Colorado, to revamp schools that don't have technology, to really help Colorado students. We believe that this is good for business because it sets the stage for responsible business owners to operate within a well-regulated business environment. The Colorado Medical Marijuana Industry Group endorses and fully supports Proposition AA and reaches out to Colorado patients and potential Colorado marijuana responsible adult users to support this proposition in the name of regulation and education. Thank you.
Thank our speakers, and I also wanted to again acknowledge our endorsements, including Attorney General Tom Suthers, the Art Association of Police Chiefs, the Denver Chamber, and of course all our speakers here today. So I think we're going to go ahead and turn things over. If there's any questions from the press, feel free to direct it to any of the speakers.
A question for, I guess really it could be anybody, but maybe one of the state representatives. Everybody knew after Amendment 64 passed that the tax would have to be approved by voters the following November, and yet they also have supported putting on the ballot this $1 billion tax increase for education. Is there a concern among the people who are advocates of this particular tax that it's going to get lost in the campaign for that? In other words, people may say, wow, these taxes are so big, there's two of them, I'm just going to vote no on everything. Are you concerned that that's going to hurt your chances of votes?
I would just say, and then we'll turn things over to the state representatives and senators. You know, our goal is to pass Proposition AA. Voters have endorsed this forward-thinking marijuana reform in Colorado. It's important that we pass this measure before we fall out. So, you know, the school measure is a separate discussion, but perhaps one of the senators will address the question.
My name is Pat Stedman. I'm the state senator from District 31. I want to agree with Brian. I mean, I think these issues will rise and fail on their own merits, and that voters in Colorado know that we live in a state where they have the right to make decisions about tax increases. And this isn't the first time or the last time that voters will see these kinds of questions on the ballot. I think our voters are discerning and able to understand what they're being asked and what are the consequences of voting yes and no. And with Prop AA, remember, this is something the voters themselves set in motion last November when they approved Amendment 64. And so I think they're familiar with where we're at in this process, and they know this question is coming, and I don't think their views towards this question will be clouded by other things that may be on the state or local ballot at the same time.
And I'll just hop in real quickly. State Representative Jonathan Singer from House District 11 up in Longmont. One of the things I want to point out is that Proposition AA, before it even had a ballot name, the Public Policy Polling Institute actually did a poll and looked at an up to 10% sales tax and up to 15% excise tax, and the support was overwhelming. Support was overwhelming. More than 2/3 of voters already support a tax at this level. And so we've done the research, we understand the importance of it, and you'll be seeing probably more than just two issues at the ballot this year. But this is about making sure marijuana pays its own way. And you know, if we can make a good rhyme like that, AA, marijuana pays its own way. No, that's. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I will stick to my change. But I think that's the important thing to understand is that the voters are discerning, but also, you know, we sat down with not only members of law enforcement, but members of the industry. So the industry has skin in the game in this one, and that's what's incredibly important here is we were able to bring both sides together for a particular issue. I think that's what will get us over the hump in November.
For the business owners and trade groups, how robust a campaign are you going to run? I guess I'm trying to say, how much of your own money are you going to kick into passing this?
Well, the short answer is whatever it takes so it wins. I mean, this is really a low-hanging fruit for the voters. The issue here is, and I think Representative Singer is dead on, marijuana has to pay its own way. And we, as a new industry, as a responsible industry, really want to take up the reins of regulation and be a partner with the state to make sure that there isn't illegal conversion, to make sure that kids, unauthorized users generally, don't end up with cannabis. So we're looking at a broad coalition of support from law enforcement, from educational groups, and of course the industry will contribute whatever it takes so this passes.
So the opposition is concerned that there's going to be pushback from their own community.
Well, you know, I think Colorado voters are very wise, and in voting for Amendment 64, it's clear that the tax piece was a piece of it, and that funding schools was an essential piece of it. So certainly, the voters, I think, will reaffirm what they've already said in terms of support for regulation and taxation of this industry. And whatever opposition there is, I think with the right arguments, we will all end up on the right side of this.
What form will the campaign take? Billboards, TV, radio advertising? How much of it?
We're still sort of fine-tuning how this campaign will look. We've created I think, a very impressive coalition, and we are currently fundraising, and we're going to be looking at sort of public outreach type measures, whether that's mailing or billboards or press events. Still to be determined, but we are taking this very seriously. We strongly want to pass legislation.
You have a budget already for advertising?
We're still working.
The legislation, you guys got some Republican support this session, but I don't see the Republican legislators up there for that in terms of active support from the GOP leaders.
I would say no. I think we wanted to put this event together in a timely fashion after some events last week, and I think so. It really was less of the fact that there's any GOP support here. I think you will see it down the road. Again, in fact, we had a discussion today in Legislative Council about Proposition AA finalizing the blue book, and there were several Republican amendments that were sponsored by Democrats to make sure that it was clear to the voters that if this measure doesn't pass, that there will be cuts to education spending and cuts to healthcare spending and those types of things. So I think they're on record of supporting this, at least initially with amendments to make sure the blue book is clear about this tax measure. And as we go forward, you'll be seeing more and more GOP support. And frankly, the top GOP elected official in the state, John Summers, has supported this measure, and I think he'll bring along with him some role as legislative friends.
Yeah, I think absolutely the Department of Justice announcement last week saying that if you are in a state that has strict rules regarding marijuana business, if you follow those strict rules, you would not be subject to federal prosecution. I think that absolutely helps our goal of passing Proposition AA. This is about strict, responsible regulation, and the federal government's memo said we need to fund these programs. We need top-down, state-regulated rules that have sufficient funding to make them meaningful. And that is exactly what we're doing. Questions?
What? Explain the mechanism of if this doesn't pass, you're going to help education and health are going to suffer.
My name is Pat Stedman again. I'm chair of the Joint Budget Committee, so I feel I'm particularly skilled at responding to the question. The regulation of the marijuana industry that Amendment 64 authorizes isn't free. It's going to cost money. And as we have seen in the medical marijuana industry, often the fees and licensing fees that we've imposed on these businesses have not been sufficient to fully fund the kind of strict and thorough regulation that we want to have. And so we're in a similar situation. We know there will be businesses paying licensing fees. There will be some revenue to the regulatory agencies, but it's probably not going to be self-sustaining. And if we do not have the sales tax that is part of Prop AA to supplement the cash funds coming in from license holders in the industry, the only other choice really in our budget is to look to the state general fund to supply the funding for the enforcement programs of the Department of Revenue. And right now the state general fund is leaned on very heavily by public school finance. Over 42% of the state general fund annually goes to that one line item in the budget supporting public education across the state. Much of the rest of the general fund is spoken for in healthcare and human service programs, courts, prisons, higher education. There's not a lot of room, and every year we struggle to maintain balance in our general fund and yet meet the needs of the people of Colorado. And if we're forced to use general fund resources to finance regulation and enforcement against marijuana industry businesses, we're diverting resources from other priorities that I think people in the state place a great deal of priority on, like public education or healthcare. Those are some of the biggest things in the budget that the general fund pays for. And if we're diverting general fund dollars over here, that's probably where they're coming from. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm a strong supporter of this measure and would encourage people to vote yes on it.